I snapped back. And two parents who could help. Why is it always me? You know Brian can't afford. Then maybe Brian should get off his ass and find a job instead of drinking his weekends away. She inhaled sharply. Nicholas, this is your family, she said, her voice turning ice cold. No, Mom, I shot back, matching her tone. I was your bank account, and it's closed for business. And for the first time in my life, I hung up on her. I expected guilt. I expected second guessing. But all I felt was relief. And then the storm hit. The fallout. The next morning, my phone was a battleground, missed calls, voicemails, texts that reeked of curiosity and anger. Dad, you're abandoning your family. Unbelievable. Mom, I can't believe how selfish you've become. Melanie, wow. Just, wow. Nick, after everything I've done for you, Brian, ironically, was silent. Maybe he knew this day was coming. And then the final message. Mom, your father's in the hospital. I hope you're happy. My stomach plummeted. The classic hospital guilt trip. The confrontation. By the time I arrived, Melanie was already pacing outside Dad's room, her arms folded tightly over her chest. When she spotted me, she scoffed. Oh look, the golden boy finally decided to show up. What happened? I asked, ignoring her tone. Mom stepped out of the room, her eyes red but calculating, like she was preparing for war. He had a stress episode, she said, from everything you put him through. I couldn't help but laugh, bitter and dry. Oh, so now I'm the problem? Melanie's glare could have burned through steel. You abandoned us. Nick, you just cut us off like we were nothing. You were nothing to me, I said flatly. Nothing but parasites. Melanie gasped like I'd slapped her. Nicholas, Mom scolded, her voice tight. But I wasn't finished. You think I don't see what's going on here? I gestured toward Dad's hospital bed. This isn't stress. This is a cheap attempt to guilt me into bailing you all out again. Silence fell heavy. Then Dad's weak voice broke through. We're your family. I stepped forward, looking him dead in the eye. No, Dad, you were a bill I kept paying. And with that, I turned and walked out. The real test. I thought things would die down after that. I was wrong. The next week, my parents went into full panic mode. They started contacting my employees, asking them to talk sense into me. They reached out to my business partners, feeding them sob stories about how I was letting my poor, struggling family suffer while I lived in luxury. They even showed up at my house. I ignored the doorbell. Then came the final straw. Mom texted me a bank account number and a single message. Just send what you can. We forgive you. Forgive me. That's when I knew. It was never about love. It was about control. I blocked their numbers, every single one. And just like that, I was free. The one I didn't expect. A week later, there was a knock on my door. It was Brian. Sober. He looked different, tired, maybe older. I know what you're thinking, he said, his voice quieter than I expected. And no, I'm not here for money. I crossed my arms. Then why? He exhaled slowly. To tell you you were right. That threw me off. What? Brian rubbed his face, looking older than I remembered. After you cut them off, they turned to me, started demanding I help, as if I had a trust fund lying around. He chuckled bitterly. When I said no, Mom lost it, called me a disappointment, told me I wasn't a real son if I wouldn't sacrifice everything for them. I stayed quiet. I knew exactly how that felt. Brian shook his head. They don't love us, Nick. They love what we give them. I studied him closely. For the first time in years, Brian wasn't the screw-up brother who always messed things up. He saw the truth now. So, what are you going to do? I asked. He shrugged. What you did. Walk away. Part of me wanted to tell him it was too late, that he'd spent too long on their side. But another part of me, the part that still believed people could change, offered him a beer instead. You should have never pushed me. For years, I ignored the signs. For years, I convinced myself that my family loved me, that I owed them everything for raising me, that it was my duty to support them. But the moment they suggested I should hire a nanny for my own kids instead of relying on them, that was it. That was the moment they made their biggest mistake. Because in that moment, I saw the truth. They didn't see me as their son. They didn't see me as their brother. They saw me as a wallet with legs. And now, I was going to show them exactly what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. Step 1. Cutting them off completely. Blocking their numbers was just the beginning. I made sure they had no access to me. Changed my email. Cut them off from my business contacts. Instructed my assistant not to take any calls from them. I even upgraded my home security system, just in case mom got any wild ideas about showing up unannounced. And then, I waited. Because I knew they would come crawling back. And I didn't have to wait long. Step 2. Making them pay, literally. A month passed. Then came the first desperate email. Mom's email. Nicholas, we need to talk. Your father is struggling with medical bills, and Melanie is at risk of losing her apartment. We're still your family. You can't just abandon us. I smiled. What she didn't know. I had already spoken to Dad's doctor. Surprise. Surprise, Dad was fine. No major health issues. No huge hospital bills. Just another lie. And Melanie? I checked on her apartment situation, too. She wasn't at risk of losing it. She just spent too much on luxury vacations again and expected me to pick up the tab. So, I ignored the email. 2 weeks later, they tried again. Dad's email. Nick, son, please, I don't know why you're acting like this, but we're family. You can't let your own flesh and blood suffer while you live in comfort. I laughed out loud at that one. Because wasn't that exactly what they'd done to me for years? But now that the money had stopped flowing, they were the ones suffering. Good. Step 3. Destroying the illusion. The final straw came when Mom showed up at my office. Somehow, she managed to charm the receptionist, and next thing I knew, she was standing in my doorway, fake tears glistening in her eyes. Nicholas, we need to fix this. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. Fix what exactly? This family. You've broken us. I almost laughed out loud. No, Mom, you broke this family the moment you decided my only worth was my bank account. Her eyes widened as if I had slapped her. How can you say that? She whispered. After everything we've done for you? I interrupted, my voice cold as ice. What have you done for me, Mom? Tell me one thing, just one. She opened her mouth. Then closed it. Because she had nothing. The brutal truth was clear. They'd done nothing for me. And the moment I had kids of my own, they didn't want to be grandparents. They only wanted me to keep paying for their lavish lifestyle. I stood up, walking around my desk until I was right in front of her. You want to know the real reason I cut you off? I asked, my voice dangerously low. Mom swallowed hard, fear creeping in her eyes. Because when I asked you to watch your own grandchildren, your own flesh and blood, you told me to hire a nanny. Helping me for once was too much to ask. Her face went pale. I didn't mean. Yes, you did. I cut her off. And in that moment, I knew. She didn't care about me. She never had. And now. I didn't care about her either. Her mouth opened, then closed. She knew it, too. She had lost me for good. Desperately, she tried one last tactic. Tears. Mickey, please, we're your family. I smiled. Not anymore. And I called security to escort her out. Step 4, the final blow. The next day, Dad called Brian. Desperate, begging him to talk some sense into me. And Brian? Brian laughed in his face. Nick was right about you all along, Brian said, and I finally see it too. So guess what, Dad? I'm done with you, too. That was it. The real end of our family. Because now, they had no one left to leech off of. And without my money, without my support, they crumbled. Melanie's downfall. 3 months later, Melanie lost her apartment. She called everyone she knew, begging for a loan. But no one helped her. I had made sure they all knew exactly what kind of person she was. She had to move back in with her parents. The very people who had enabled her for years. Imagine that, 36 years old, broke, and stuck in the same childhood bedroom she used to mock me for being too serious in. Dad's fall. Dad had to sell the house. Not just sell it for less than market value. He had racked up so much debt that the bank was ready to take everything. And guess what? For the first time in his life, he had no one to bail him out. Mom's last attempt. Mom tried to beg other relatives for help. But guess what? I had already told them everything. No one wanted to bail them out. Because no one wants to help a family of leeches. Once they realized the truth, and me, I moved on with my life. Better, happier, finally free. And not for a second did I feel guilty. Because they brought this on themselves. They should have never pushed me. They should have never made me choose between them and my own family. Because they never realized. I was never really theirs to begin with. 1 year later, the best decision I ever made. It's been exactly 1 year since I cut my family off. 1 year since I stopped being their personal bank. 1 year since I finally chose myself. And let me tell you, I regret nothing. What happened after I walked away? At first, I expected guilt, maybe some doubt. Instead, I felt free. For the first time in my life, my phone wasn't buzzing constantly with demands. I wasn't stressed about covering someone else's rent, bills, or last-minute emergencies that weren't really emergencies. I could finally focus on my life. My business flourished. My marriage grew stronger. My kids, they got the father they deserved, the one who wasn't constantly exhausted from trying to solve everyone else's problems. And my family? They crumbled. Melanie, living in her own mess. Melanie lost her apartment and had to move back in with our parents. From what I've heard, it's been far from ideal. She's hopping from one low-paying job to the next, complaining about how life isn't fair and Nick abandoned us. But the best part? Mom and Dad finally realized just how much of a financial burden she was. Without me funding her lifestyle, she was just another broke, entitled adult who never learned how to take care of herself. Dad, facing his own consequences. Dad had to sell the house, at a loss. The bank was on his back with massive, unpaid debts. And for the first time in his life, he had to actually face the consequences of his actions. The man who used to lecture me about family duty and responsibility was now renting a tiny apartment in a rough neighborhood, struggling to make ends meet. Mom's last attempt. A few months ago, Mom tried one last time to reel me back in. She sent me an email. Mom, Nicholas, your father and I are getting older. We can't live like this forever. You need to understand that family is family, no matter what. Let's put the past behind us. I laughed out loud reading it. I didn't even bother responding. Because the truth is, the past isn't the problem. They are. Going viral on Reddit. A few months ago, I decided to share my story online. I was curious, was I really the bad guy for cutting them off? Was I as selfish as they claimed? So, I posted my entire experience on Reddit. The response? Explosive. Thousands of comments. Tens of thousands of upvotes. People cheered me on. Some shared their own stories about cutting off toxic families. It blew my mind. I'd spent years believing I was the only one going through this. That somehow, I was wrong for standing up for myself. But reading those comments? It confirmed everything. I wasn't wrong. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't selfish. I was just done being used. The final message. Last week, I received one final email. It was from Melanie. Melanie, I hope you're happy. Nick, Mom and Dad are struggling, and I'm barely making ends meet. I lost everything because of you, but I know one day, you'll realize your mistake. And when that day comes, I hope you remember that family forgives. I read it, smiled, and deleted it. Because the only mistake I made was not cutting them off sooner. Final thoughts. So here I am. 1 year later. Living the best life I've ever had. My business is thriving. My kids are happy. My stress is gone. And my family? They're finally dealing with the consequences of their own actions. If I've learned anything from this past year, it's this. Family isn't defined by blood. Family is the people who treat you like family. And some people? They don't deserve a second chance.